Power prices have doubled. City-owned. Now they're shutting down the other big one the city owns. Modern, great system. Getting rid of it. And they admit it will increase prices for the select groups that get the Obama waivers. I mean, there's more than one way to rob a bank, folks. This is where it's happening. It's artificial scarcity, just like Enron got caught doing. And I'm living under it. I'm living under it where they're saying now when you buy a house in Austin, they've got to come do a city audit and harass you and all this stuff. I mean, it's hellish to live under these parasites. Mark Moreno, thank God for what you're doing, but things are getting dark. You know, because we're winning, the empire striking back, people should go to climatedepot.com. They should click on your sponsors. They should support the products you've got there. They've got to go to INFOWARS.com and PRISONPLANET.com. You know, right now, I'm not giving it attention. It's no big deal. I'll defeat it. I've been sued 3 times with slap suits. I defeat them. But, I mean, these people do not like free speech. And you were, telling me before we went on air about some of the stuff happening. I want to cover that first with National Review. I was talking to people in towns outside Austin where this stuff is happening. They really want to intimidate us. And I think the answer is beat them in court, and then for their false prosecution, their false civil action, go back after them. I've done that before and won. Because I'm not going to be bullied and pushed around. I mean, if they get away with this, my God, the sky's the limit. I mean, I know I'm ranting, but break down what's happening with the threats out there, and then I want to get into this shutting down power plants, 1/3 of them nationwide right now.
Yeah, well, first of all, on the Agenda 21 thing you mentioned, right before the Rio conference, our EPA administrator, Lisa Jackson, flew to Paris for an organizational meeting with other UN delegates to discuss how to plan a global environmental governance. So we have the head of the EPA who actively shutting down coal plants, deeply steeped in the Agenda 21 process with the United Nations and Sustainable Development. It's a very, very scary development because the EPA, of course, is an unelected, unregulated, unaudited agency that can pretty much run roughshod over whatever they want to do, which is why the Obama administration is now enforcing global warming laws through the EPA because they couldn't get it through Congress and they couldn't get a UN treaty out of it. So, and what's happened there, and you've touched on that too, Alex, there's a you could call it a thin skin, but that's a very superficial way of looking at it. There's a strategy here to not only shut down debate, but to intimidate anyone who's a critic of the UN process and of the alleged consensus view of man-made global warming and modern environmentalism. In fact, Patrick Moore, one of the co-founders of Greenpeace, who turned against the organization and now is one of the biggest speakers against the United Nations and against climate hysteria, he is being viciously attacked every time he speaks out. He has been targeted by these individuals. In addition, Michael Mann, the ClimateGate scientist, is now going after and threatening to sue National Review and commentator Mark Stein for essentially saying that his hockey stick graph was fraudulent and that it was proven wrong. And they're going after him. He hired, and this is no joke, the tobacco lawyer who represented Joe Camel. Now, keep in mind, the left is always liking to accuse conservatives of being in the pay of big tobacco and we're big tobacco. Well, here's the left. Michael Mann, ClimateGate UN scientist, hiring Joe Camel's attorney to go around and threaten National Review. And this lawsuit, the National Review's simple answer is bring it on, much like you. They believe that through the discovery process, Michael Mann will be forced to turn over many documents and correspondence that would ruin him and bury him. And so we're calling this Bluffgate. Michael Mann and his lawyer has still not filed the lawsuit. And if they do, it's going to be one of the biggest trials of the modern era, particularly when it comes to global warming and modern environmentalism.
Well, what's incredible about this is we've got the ClimateGate emails out of the university there in England where they're saying we've got to hide the decline. You've got the proof that Pachari was making stuff up and also getting money out of all this. You've got the fact that openly Obama's giving waivers to GE and others to shut down their competition. I mean, this is really becoming transparent to people. And now we see these moves to engage in authoritarianism to try to shut people down. It's very, very frustrating. I mean, there was that female professor, I forget her name now, who was saying that Obama, just ignore what people want. You've got other professors in the London Guardian saying, hey, let's have green fascism. We barely criticized her, you and I. What's her name, guys? And yeah, Norgard. She had our video shut down on YouTube. I filed a bunch of stuff and got it back up, but now YouTube doesn't even let you file. They just say, well, we found it's bad. And all we did was show her writings, and then she took them down, and then we found other sites at another university where she said even more stuff. I mean, I can't even show you what she wrote publicly. I mean, it's just insane. The fact is they cannot debate us.
No, they can't. In fact, let's go with Michael Mann, by the way. The lawyer's name is John B. Williams of Cozen O'Connor, and this is the law firm that represented Joe Campbell in the tobacco lawsuits. Now, what's interesting is another skeptical scientist, Timothy Ball in Canada, was recently sued as well. And as long as I believe it was the Canadian Free Press was threatened a lawsuit for publishing articles skeptical of global warming. And here's the thing. On Michael Mann's case, I did a huge, long, detailed, probably thousands of words, I don't know, 5,000-word rebuttal to Michael Mann's claims. Michael Mann's, one of his key claims to being essentially clean ethically is that Penn State University did an investigation by him, on him, and cleared him. But the same man, Spurrier, who did an investigation on Sandusky and cleared him years earlier. And so there's no connection between Mann and Sandusky, except that the same university cleared them. And this was an investigation that was called hard to come up with a bigger mockery or anything that could be seen as more transparent, more a mockery than any investigation. I mean, this was the university investigating itself, didn't ask any of the right people, didn't ask any of the right questions. But Michael Mann will go around and tout this as some kind of proof that he had been cleared. Keep in mind, one of Michael Mann's own UN IPCC, the climate panel of the United Nations scientists, a man named Edward Zurita, has called for Michael Mann to be banned from the UN climate process based on his view that Michael Mann doesn't have the ethics to continue there. So Michael Mann's own colleagues don't want anything to do with it. And we also have the email evidence that when Phil Jones asked Michael Mann to delete emails and tell other people to delete emails, Michael Mann, basically, if you look at the emails, it's very clear that he passed on that request and may have deleted the emails himself. So here we have him essentially obstructing the Freedom of Information Act process. Michael Mann is heavily involved in that if you look at the emails. So it's one of those things where Michael Mann is huffing and puffing. He has still not filed suit. But it does have a chilling effect, and this is what they're hoping. They bring in the big, expensive lawyers. They go after the big names and some of the little names, and the idea is they're making everyone think twice. It's an atmosphere of intimidation.
But that's going to backfire. You put this stuff on in front of a jury, and then you're going to be facing, just like has happened to a lot of other groups, you're going to be facing the attorney's fees and damages. I mean, the courts aren't perfect, but I found the courts do not like lawsuits trying to shut down free speech, especially of public figures. Now, if it's some little old lady and you say something about her, you're in trouble. But when somebody's a public figure and you've got all these emails out there, well, I mean, let's break down just briefly, and then I want to get to other news. Let's break down briefly the problem with the hockey stick. I mean, it's like Al Gore saying polar bears can't swim, or Al Gore saying that carbon dioxide goes up and then heat goes up, but all the universities do the ice cores, it's the opposite. I mean, they've just got a problem here. I mean, everyone I know, including the Democrats, knows that Al Gore is a piece of garbage joke. I mean, Al Gore is a absolute fraud, and I'll say it. He didn't invent the internet. I mean, I just can't believe what a joke this guy is.
Yeah, and by the way, Al Gore's producer, Lori David, wrote a children's book for Scholastic Books, that it was for children's books across the country, and actually reversed that CO2 temperature chart and had CO2 rising before temperature, exact opposite of what the charts show. And they were later called on it by a skeptical scientist, and they ended up saying, oh, oops, it was a typo. Very hard to believe. This went out in all the first editions of the book. I'm not even sure they had a second edition. And this, this draft was actually reversed. And in the film, Al Gore presented that without identifying which was which. He said there's a close relationship. He didn't identify that CO2 the temperature led CO2. But back to Michael Mann.
Well, yeah, I mean, he had them together, and then I was conflating that with the book where they had them backwards. You're right. They had them together, correct? But really, it's heat and then carbon dioxide.
Yes, and on Michael Mann's claim, Michael Mann's entire claim to fame is he looked at northern hemisphere temperatures from 1000 AD to the 20th century, and he claimed the temperatures were relatively stable until a big hockey stick, a big jump. So it looks like a hockey stick blade with the blade up in the air.
But he didn't look at the Bronze Age. He didn't look at the Iberian Maxim. He didn't look at all the other spikes before that.
No, but even if you look at what he looked at, his science doesn't hold up. One fellow scientist, named Hans von Storch in Germany, called it statistical rubbish. Steve McIntyre of Climate Audit, a statistician, tore it apart and said basically the way man had his temperature proxy, almost any numbers you fed into it would create a hockey stick. It was preconceived science. And since that time, we have had, and this is what I document on Climate Depot in this huge report, study after study of both the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere, ocean temperatures, Europe, Switzerland, Antarctica, have shown that there was a prominent warming period that was as warm or warmer, the medieval warm period from 900 to 1300 AD, and we had a very cold period, the Little Ice Age, that came up until about 1850. So the idea that temperatures were stable is completely out. His work, Michael Mann's work, has been demolished in the peer-reviewed literature. And what you'll hear constantly back is, well, we've had all these other independent people verify. No, most of the people are the other authors who Michael Mann, all of his fellow reviewers, it's this small clique of scientists using very similar data, all reinforcing each other's conclusion. But when it's looked at independently, it's statistical rubbish. And then when you look at the actual temperatures of the last 1,000 years, from many big, I think it was 700 scientists and 40 institutions have looked at this, and there's absolutely was a medieval warm period, there absolutely was a Little Ice Age, and the claim, and there's a new study just came out in the journal Nature that said the Roman warming period and the medieval warming period were likely warmer than temperatures today.
Sure, that's why there was grapes growing in Scotland, and they haven't grown there in thousands of years. But going back here, my issue is, for years, watching Al Gore in front of Congress saying there is a consensus, no scientists disagree, and it was just a total fraud. I mean, but let's say global warming was real. How does shutting down our power plants and getting rid of our cars and letting little hippie inspectors in our houses to control our lives, how does that help anything when China, India, Mexico, and 160 other plus countries are exempt and our jobs have already left the country? I mean, you know, California's imploding. They put a 20% carbon tax on them. I mean, they admit they want a post-industrial world. They're Malthusians, people like Maurice Strong. I mean, really, these people are megalomaniacs. And all we've got to do is point out they're the ones shutting the economy down. I mean, I'm ranting, but...
No, and it's exactly right. We have people like John Holdren, Obama's science advisor, who said that cheap energy is one of the hazards of a free society. We have people like Secretary Chu, who actually thinks that we'll know the energy mix of the world 100 years from now. He's basically a killer, and he's claiming, they all claim, people like Barbara Boxer claim that acts of Congress in the United Nations can control the weather. We had President Obama in 2008, after the night of his election, I believe, came out and said his will be the administration that slows the rise of the oceans and heals the planet. They actually believe that we can control sea level